spite of all this nonsense from the left, we are going to win. We're in the process of taking this country back. We are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
Hi everyone, my name is Hadia and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing well even after that introduction. Today I'm going to be talking about what you literally just heard, and that is Project 2025. At this point, I'm sure you've already heard so much about it, so I'm not going to be getting into too much detail, but what I did want to talk about is who is behind this entire thing. There's already so much information regarding what Project 2025 will do and what the organization behind it has to do with the Trump administration, but nothing about what the organization is, why it exists, and how it was able to amass so much power in the first place. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about Project 2025, who the Heritage Foundation is, and their history of influence within conservative politics in America. So let's get into it. So Project 2025 is a 4-point plan involving an 180-day roadmap for conservatives to take back the reins of the government, create a more conservative America, and save this country from the radical left, because Democrats are historically super radical. You can actually find more information about Project 2025 all over the internet. There are tons of articles, a website, and a 900-page book explaining everything in detail. So if that's your vibe, definitely check that out. But if you want a summary, it basically supports the unitary executive theory, which gives the president total control over the executive branch of the government, meaning the president has more control over independent agencies, the military, and can influence policy without Congress. So as you can see, that's pretty bad. And because it's terrible, it's actually very unpopular even amongst Republicans. So because of this, Trump has attempted to distance himself from the entire project. He even came out with his own policies, all in caps and on Truth Social, of course, but if you look at them closely, some of them are actually pretty similar to what's in Project 2025. And again, even though he's trying to say that he doesn't support the entire project, Project 2025 is a transitionary guide for the next Republican president. And because Donald Trump is the only person running for the next Republican president, Project 2025 is meant for Trump. But again, the dangers of Project 2025 isn't the point of my video today. What I wanted to talk about was who's behind this entire thing and how did they become such a threat. So, who is behind Project 2025? Well, that is the Heritage Foundation. Usually when it comes to these things, you have to do a lot of digging and a lot of research, but not in this case, because everything is right in front of your face. All you have to do is Google Project 2025 and these idiots will show up. I thought this was kind of crazy because Project 2025 is insane, and normally people try to hide the fact that they want to oppress you, but not in this case. And to be fair, I do think it's a little slimy that they're masking this as conservative values when in reality it's all just fascism, but I'm not going to defend conservative values because I also don't like conservative values. So the next time you see someone wearing a Reagan Bush 84 t-shirt, remember to throw your shoes at them, because they deserve it. Anyway, the people behind Project 2025 come from the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank based in Washington, D.C. Think tanks are research institutes or policy institutes that do research or advocacy on policy. Most think tanks are registered non-governmental organizations. The Heritage Foundation is a 501c3, meaning that it's a non-profit organization. This means that they're not really supposed to be interfering politically. However, they love to brag about the influence they've had over the past few Republican presidents, with the first being Ronald Reagan. But they actually existed before Reagan ever even became president, and the Heritage Foundation was founded in 1973 during the Nixon administration by 3 men named Paul Weyrich, Edwin Fulner, and Joseph Coors. Paul was an American religious conservative political activist and helped co-found the New Right, which is a coalition of right-wing political groups all over the world. They often spoke out against abortion, gay rights, the Equal Rights Amendment, which was an amendment against gender discrimination, the Panama Canal Treaty, which gave Panama control over the Panama Canal. They also spoke out against affirmative action and most forms of taxation. Paul also founded a bunch of other extreme right-wing groups like the Free Congress Foundation, the American Legislative Exchange Council, as well as the Moral Majority, which was a Christian conservative group that supported the same things as the New Right, but also wanted to implement Christian prayers in school and was deeply anti-Semitic. Edwin Fulner was a congressional aide to Wisconsin legislator Melvin Laird, who was the Secretary of Defense under Richard Nixon, and also served as the Heritage Foundation's president from 1977 to 2013, and then again from 2017 to 2018. The last founder is a man named Joseph Coors, aka the founder of the Coors Brewing Company. The origins of the foundation were the three men's discontent with Richard Nixon's economic policy. They claimed he was too embracing of the liberal consensus, also known as the Washington Consensus. This was a set of market-based policies used to help rebuild poor countries in Africa and Latin America. The effects are still being debated today, however, I don't think it was ever repealed because it was implemented all throughout the 80s. What I do think they were actually against was Nixon's domestic economic policy, which was honestly pretty good. It involved a 75% marginal tax rate. If you don't know what that means, it's basically after you make a certain amount of money, that additional income is taxed 75%. So last year, for example, Jeff Bezos made $191,780,000 per day. That is $69,999,700,000 a year. If we did a marginalized tax on everything above $1 billion, that still allows Bezos to keep $1 billion, and the leftover $68,999,700,000 would get taxed by 75%. So that's a situation in which $51 billion would come out, and he still gets to keep $17 billion. And that's just one billionaire, when there are 756 in America. Just think about it. Anyway, at the beginning, Coors was the main source of funding for the foundation until they began to use direct mail fundraising tactics. This helped them raise $1 million in 1976, which by today's standards would be $5 million, and then their budget grew to $5.3 million in 1986, which would be $17.3 million today. The Heritage Foundation's main competition was the American Enterprise Institute, which is another conservative think tank based in DC, which is famously known for backing the war in Iraq and also vehemently denying climate change. So in order to make a real distinction between the foundation and the American Enterprise Institute, they decided to focus on issues that were more important to Christian conservatives. The foundation remained small up until they published their first Mandate for Leadership in 1981. This is something they release every few years, with the first Mandate for Leadership being for Ronald Reagan and the ninth being Project 2025. So this is nothing new. The first mandate consisted of over 2,000 policy recommendations that Ronald Reagan could implement to advance the foundation's agenda. They claimed this mandate was a blueprint for grabbing the government by its frayed New Deal lapels and shaking out 48 years of liberal policy. And Reagan liked this mandate so much that he gave copies of them to every single member of his cabinet and ended up implementing over 60% of it by the end of his first year in office. The Heritage Foundation's influence was so strong that Reagan even referred to them as a vital force during his presidency. Another thing that they helped implement was the Reagan Ballistic Missile Defense Site, which is an island south of Hawaii that America colonized to test all of its long-range missiles. Anyway, it is quite obvious that the foundation wouldn't exist without the Reagan administration, so much so that the Ronald Reagan Foundation actually came out with a podcast dedicated to the Heritage Foundation, stating that it's hard to tell the story of one without the other. Now, because the Mandate for Leadership is just a transitionary guide from one Republican president to the next person to implement policies from the Heritage Foundation was President George H.W. Bush. Their role was so significant that it's often said that the Heritage Foundation's research laid much of the groundwork for the Bush administration. And in addition to budget reforms from the third Mandate for Leadership, the Bush administration also got the idea for Operation Desert Storm, also known as the Persian Gulf War, from the Heritage Foundation. This is when America invaded Kuwait to spread freedom and democracy. Just kidding, it's actually because America didn't want Iraq to become one of the largest oil producers in the world. After the Bush administration was the Clinton administration, which the Heritage Foundation was originally against. But some of Clinton's welfare reforms actually align with and are said to be inspired by Heritage Foundation recommendations. Contrary to popular belief, the Clintons are not a bunch of leftist radicals. They're actually very conservative. And these welfare reforms were implemented in the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act, which limited welfare to a 5-year lifetime limit for recipients, required work within 2 years of receiving benefits, benefits, replaced aid to families with children, and only gave temporary assistance to families in need. This dramatically reduced the number of people in welfare programs, but it also led to a 50% increase in childhood poverty, and this number is expected to be higher within Black families. It also created an uneven distribution of wealth because it gave more power to the states, and this allowed each of them to adjust their requirements for each of the welfare programs. So richer states that had more money were able to give to more people, whereas poorer states with less money weren't able to do so. After Bill Clinton, who's famously known for having a pretty boring presidency, left office, we got the second Bush administration. At this point, the Heritage Foundation was labeled one of the most influential think tanks in Washington, D.C., and they supported things like Bush's decision to go to war with Afghanistan and Iraq. They also defended the treatment of captives in Guantanamo Bay, which, if you didn't know, was a literal war crime. However, that presidency is riddled with them, so it's nothing new. So after we got one of the most transparent presidencies, which had nothing to do with the oil industry, we got the historic presidency of America's most attractive war criminal, Barack Obama. The Heritage Foundation obviously didn't like him, and this is when they decided to start their first 501c4 or political organization called Heritage Action. Their website is equally insane, and I highly recommend you check it out, but it wasn't until Obama's second term that the foundation began to experience any sort of controversy. This began in 2013 when a foundation fellow named Jason Richwine made comments at an American Enterprise Institute forum claiming that Blacks and Hispanics were intellectually inferior to whites and had trouble assimilating due to the genetic predisposition of having a lower IQ. Later that year, both Richwine and another fellow named Robert Rector were criticized because of their methodology done on an immigration reform policy. They didn't do this thing called dynamic scoring, which is basically when you give context to how taxes are affecting an economy through a macroeconomic and behavioral lens. And they basically used this to argue that immigrants' IQs should be considered when crafting policy. Now we're in 2016, and this is when things begin to get interesting because the Heritage Foundation did not like Donald Trump. In 2015, the Heritage Action leader said on Fox News that Donald Trump is a clown and that he needs to get out of the race. In 2015, Stephen Moore said, "The problem for Trump is that he's full of all of these contradictions. He's kind of a tabula rasa on policy." If you don't know what a tabula rasa is, it means blank slate in Latin. So while the quote seems derogatory, it makes sense that Trump was confusing. He was this huge corporate figure who talked about draining the swamp even though he was the swamp. But because he was such a blank slate, it was easy for the foundation to push any policy onto him that they wanted to, because the reality is he only stood for corporate interest. So months before the election, the foundation actually began emailing potential political appointees, and they sent this out to over 3,000 members of a database that they'd collected. And of the 3,000, 66 were selected to work in Trump's administration. This includes Betsy DeVos, Mick Mulvaney, Rick Perry, Scott Pruitt, and Jeff Sessions. And by January 2018, the Trump administration had implemented around 64%, or 2/3 of the Heritage Foundation's proposed policies. They were so influential in Trump's presidency that even CNN stated, "No other Washington institution has that kind of footprint in the transition." And so that's how the Heritage Foundation went from Ronald Reagan's "Let's Make America Great Again" to the Trump cult of "Make America Great Again." So that's the history of the foundation. Now let's look a little bit into what they stand for today. The objectives can be found on their website, which is to formulate and promote public policies based on the principles of free enterprise, limited government, individual freedom, traditional American values, and a strong national defense. Underneath this purpose statement is a link to a PDF which will tell you everything in full, with big blue bullet points which state they want to empower parents to make education choices, secure America's borders and reduce crime, ensure free and fair elections, reverse the growth of regulations, spending, and inflation, counter the threat of communist China, hold big tech accountable, and protect unborn life and family formation. And underneath this is a letter from the Heritage Foundation's president, which only reiterates the terrifying statement mentioned at the beginning of this video. It says, "History is once again calling America, the last best hope of Earth, to defy the privileged and powerful and defend our revolution, our Constitution, and our heritage. Join us in the Second American Revolution, and once again, together we will win." I would like to say something about the name of the Heritage Foundation, considering this foundation was created during the Civil Rights Movement. I think heritage is another term for white, because why else would they say our heritage? And also, if you look at everyone who works there, they're all white. So this is terrifying. But this was also published at least a year ago, and the Heritage Foundation's been around for a very long time. So the fact that Democrats are acting acting scared now is just a little too late. They should have clocked this a long time ago, but of course they didn't. So now we have this incredibly powerful far-right organization that's apparently going to turn American democracy into a fascist state. But I also think that this is why Democrats are only pretending to be scared, because again, the foundations existed for a while. They've influenced presidencies and elected officials before, so this is nothing new. And I also think that a lot of Democrats actually agree with Republicans on economics and immigration, and the only real difference is abortion and lip service to marginalized communities. But you didn't hear that from me. Anyway, that's pretty much it for this video. I hope you all learned something. If you're interested in learning more, I'll definitely link the websites below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!
Coconut, 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 coconut.